Good afternoon. My name is Father Rob Carbonneau. I'm Emeritus Director of the United States China Catholic Association. I'm also at the Ricci Institute for Chinese Western Cultural History at Boston College. And I'm the chair of this panel. The name of the panel is Understanding China's Past and Present Realities as a Foundation for the Future of USCCA Relationships. My fellow panelists are Dr. Xiaoxin, who I'll introduce in a moment. Many of you have heard Dr. Anthony Clark from Whitworth University in Spokane. And we're each going to present on various topics that are in the program. And then we're going to have a quick shared commentary with each other, and then open it up for questions. And I'll explain as things go on, or this panel goes on, why this panel was created. The main thing is that the USCCA is 35 years, right? 35 years. The Ricci Institute is 40 years old, and Professor Clark has been doing this since before he was born. So everybody has a longevity in this, and we wanted to look at these types of experiences to ask people to look at institutions and longevity of interrelationships, of dialogue, friendship, academics, and that dimension. So that's really the purpose of this panel. So I'll get started right away, and we'll move forward. 1989年，在中国，很多人我说他们说 When's the first time you came to China? And I say, 1989年. People look at me and don't say anything. And the reason is very important. It's because of Tiananmen Square. It's because of Tiananmen Square, not because my Chinese is horrible. It's because of Tiananmen Square. Why do I start with this? Because the United States Catholic China Bureau was started in 1989. So the key thing to remember here is when this organization was started, it was 1989, just after Tiananmen Square, a historic moment, and the organization had to determine whether or not it was going to be a crisis or an opportunity. It was a perfect moment in the tension to shut the whole thing down. Why move forward after Tiananmen Square? China's a disaster. But the hope is not a disaster. The people are not a disaster. The culture is not a disaster. Catholicism, religion, people are not disasters. People are a gift. And this was the longevity. What did it emerge from? The USCCA, the China Catholic Association, as it was known originally, China Catholic China Bureau, was actually emerged in 1989. But in the early 80s, in a whole decade, there was an organization called the Catholics in America Concerned About China. I was going to that since I was in my early 20s. Dick Manson was present there. Dick Manson and I were at meetings in 1980 together, many years before many of you were born. So we were actually in this, and this was made up of religious orders that were trying to develop the understanding. I'm a Passionist priest. This is a Passionist religious habit, Passionist garb, which I took when I took my vows. I'll be buried in it, and some people hope that that might be sooner. Some people hope that might be later. But what happened also is, these are key points here, because this organization of the United States China Catholic Association just not emerge out of anywhere. And the issues and the structure and the purpose is very important to know why these conferences and why this reality is still holding on to its vision of hope in Christ. The National Catholic Conference of Bishops was called the USCC. It was renamed in 2001 to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the USCCB, when the organization has always been U.S.-based. So there's a lot of times dialogue at these meetings, where should this organization go? It was founded as a U.S.-based organization. Doesn't mean it can't change, but that's its legacy. And it's been steadfast in its mission and challenges 35 years. So what I want to do is just reflect on that for a moment. And I'm going to do that in a way by looking at the leaders, the executive directors, and doing a biographical insight of different structural issues, purposeful issues of different situations that each director has had. And so the first person was Sister Janet Carroll from Marino. She used the term bureau as a conscious term because it mirrored the Catholic Central Bureau in Shanghai. In the Marino priests and the people of Shanghai were very committed, and Bibiana Wong has written a book on this. And so this is a conscious legacy shift from the struggles of 1950s up until the present day, and so of 1989. So bureau was a specific choice word. In the 1990s, though, the people would come to the different, and we would start opening up meetings and different things, and people thought, because of the word bureau, that we were a front for the FBI, the Chinese officials, and they would say, you're a bureau, that means you work for the US government. And the government of the United States had questions about us as well. So essentially, the terminology did not always translate well into the mission. But the term was used because of the mission that linked itself back to China. Now, what was the first aspects here of Sister Janet Carroll in formulating this? One of the things was it was an independent entity. The bishops of the United States really were supportive of this organization, but because of China's sensitivity, they did not necessarily want to have it officially sanctioned. They wanted independence, but it has always been an independent entity with official approval of the United States Catholic bishops, and it's in the Catholic directory, which is good because it makes it a nonprofit. China Church Quarterly, and this is what Sister Janet Carroll did. She was executive director from 1989 to 2003. She was a very important leader and steward and had a vision and tried to make this work in very real ways by operating what was the China Church Quarterly. It was 4 times a year. And a main point that I want to emphasize is that as each one of these executive directors are mentioned, the technology has shaped the mission and also has shifted the mission and has caused a lot of different challenges. Conferences were started. One of the things we found out in putting this together, that list you see in the conference program is 29, but somewhere someone counted wrong, and it's probably really 19. And so then if you count them, I believe it's 19, and someone asked me that, and I said, I don't know, I just was tabulating the material, and so that is a function. But Marino began to sponsor the China Educators and Formators program. This became actually the way in which this organization began to learn and enter into friendship, because as these priests and sisters started to come here, this was the voice of dialogue, and many people wanted to understand this. So this became really the information that was put in the China Church Quarterly, because we were actually getting the voices of the people from China to actually speak about their experiences, and this was totally unique. No one knew these voices. Then the religious congregations of men and women, I'm going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow, but the religious congregations of men and women, over 33 religious orders, were trying to figure out what is their relationship to China. And this was the USCCA, USCCB, was a place where all these different groups could start to dialogue and at least have a conversation about which direction to go, because no one knew what to do. And then ITESH, which was run by the Colombians, I taught with them. They put teachers into the field to teach. We became actually a clearing area for ITESH. We would interview people who wanted to teach in China. And then Sister Janet studied the China tours. Tom Sendlin, I think, is here. He was on one of the China tours. They had people from NCR, the National Catholic Reporter. They had a lot of different editors and people who went and part of these China tours. And this was really important because we saw historic sites, but it wasn't a pilgrimage. It was a China tour. Words mattered. And then the board of directors. There was a board of directors, and that's how it got connected with Dr. Wu Xiaoxin and also the Ricci Institute. This board of directors started to emerge. So Sister Janet Carroll was a very strong personality and a person who had a clear understanding that this should move forward. So 1989 was an opportunity actually to keep this now because it was needed more than ever before. You shouldn't stop when the need is still operative. So she was the first director. Okay. Doug Lovejoy was the next one, and he's here. He was for 3 years. Same operations model. The technology began to shift a little bit. Computers were starting. There really wasn't computer use when this organization started. Public policy, they began to actually talk with leaders at the Senate, and they started looking at human rights. They built on ecumenical ties, and this is when the Matteo Ricci Award was started under his leadership. And so he worked in that area. So this the same model, that Herman. And then it moved. In 1989, it was in Seton Hall University. In 2013, it moved to Friendship House in Berkeley, California. And I'll get into that in a moment. Michel Marcil, from 2006 to 2014, a Jesuit, he maintained a strong presence as an executive director with a core staff. One of the main issues and challenges has always been staff development and sometimes development with no staff. And so this has always been a key dynamic of how to maintain and what is the staff function, what is the staff hope, what do you actually do with the staff. If you have a strong leader, what does the staff, the leader want the staff to do? And once you advertise something, how do you implement it if the public starts to deal with you? The China province of the Society of Jesus was important. Father Michel played much more important on the China Church Quarterly. And when it moved actually to the West Coast, he began to work with the Chinese Catholic communities. He was very much pastorally oriented. He wanted to do that. And funding was still based on the religious congregations, but the new portfolio options started to emerge. And he began to actually now pay attention more to the website. First 2 directors were challenged by the website. That was website development was new. No one knew what to do with this. There were old shifting models. Who was third? Me. Doug Lovejoy had got me a beer at Technion, Illinois, and said, I think you'll be good at this. And so I said, sure. Why? Because as an academic, I would go to these conferences, but I found them sometimes totally useless because it didn't always address academic needs for me. But it kept my academic interests very real, that my academics had to apply to people in Chinese who were living, not just historic actors. And I'm a 20th century scholar. So that was my area. And as I said, I went back even before the founding of the organization. So I tried to look at the pastoral and academic relationships. I worked in Berkeley. The board became much more attentive to finances. I put on 2 conferences, and also the Matteo Ricci Award was given to the bishop and auxiliary bishop in San Francisco and also in Oakland. And so that was very interesting. And I ran a study tour. I never believed in my wildest dream I would do a study tour in China. And that was absolutely exciting. And then I had a limited staff structure. for a lot of various reasons. So I had to be very creative and very much trustworthy that all this development would happen and work well. So I stayed until 2017. I happened to be at University of San Francisco, coming to an end. Father Michael Agliardo took over from me in 2017 to 2023. He continued on the West Coast. He started with the staff, Kathleen O'Brien, to look towards friendship ministry. So he tried to expand this notion. He tried to upgrade and restructure the USCCA website. He was very important, and he was able to convince, and the board worked with him, change the name. And then another thing, which I think is very important, he guided the USCCA through the pandemic. So these are the directors, and we're looking for a new director at this time. So right now, the USCCA, 35 years, is at a crossroads. And we are looking for new people to actually shift our vision from the way and the challenges of stewardship that have emerged into the future. So what are the points? Be thankful for the missionary legacy. Being thankful for the missionary legacy is something we always hear from people in China, that the missionaries were important. Use friendship building as a model. Listen to Chinese Catholics. That actually has occurred more now than ever before. These conferences have given a strong voice to Chinese Catholics. Deal with all the educators, ecumenical, tourists. There's a lot of people who are interested in China. How do we deal with that population? Tours, I think, I'm not sure the future of tours in China at this moment. Why not do tours among Catholic communities in the United States of Chinese? Public understanding into the future. Media and public presence, I'll talk a little bit about tomorrow in my session. Relationship with other organizations and entities. We need a new director, a strong board of directors. We want and welcome participation, and we need people in our affiliate program. You can see Mary Sluka on that. I want to say one thing about the Cardinal Kung Foundation. I think that one of the challenges that this organization has dealt with is, my closing thoughts, is many people always say, well, there's an underground church, there's an unregistered church in China, and how can there be a Catholic church in China? The Cardinal Kung Foundation actually talks about this issue, and we don't talk to them. And I think with all the different aspects, the media actually goes to this organization many times because it deals with persecution. Now, persecution has been real, but suffering has been real. I tend to look at the idea of suffering, and I think that has a much more theological and moral and friendship model. But the news tends to want to look at this. So the voice of this organization, the USCCA, is a different model. And I should say in the 1990s, the Apostolic Delegation made a comment, and I would have to look it up, made a comment that this organization, the Kung Foundation, does not officially speak for the Catholic Church in China. It got that much of a debate. And there was a document made for that. But we don't talk to each other in the United States, and we're polarized. And so that's a very real aspect of real friendship. And so the companionship on the journey has to be addressed as they look towards their future. And I would end by this. Look at this. Look at this. This is Matteo Ricci's grade, right? To the far side is black and white. To the my near side is in color. The nuance of looking at that is as unique as this dialogue of friendship is. We can look at these issues in black and white, rules and regulations, or we can look at this dialogue in the USCCA movement into the future in a way of color, and we can begin to imagine and be thankful and understand. My closing point is the executive directors since 1989 have had to adapt, challenge, move forward, and no one would have believed in 1989 that this would have ever occurred given that moment of Igio, Baggio, Nien. And everyone says the challenges are real now. The challenges were very real then. We've existed for 35 years, and we want to move forward. We need your assistance. But this is the structure. Why is it continued? Why will it continue? What has been its liabilities? What will be its future? the history of this organization mirrors other institutional structures that have lasted for this time, and why do they continue? Why do they end? Thank you.
Thank you, Father Rob, for that nice introduction. And one thing that Father Rob, in spite of the fact that we have known each other for more than 30 years, first met at USCCA annual conference, one thing that he hasn't mentioned is that we have managed for the past 30 years not to kill each other. No, we'll work on different projects, and both of us are historians, and I appreciate his sharing of reflections about the history of USCCA, 35 years, tremendously, because I appreciate history, and I find that we learn a lot from history ourselves. Now, the Beach Institute for Chinese Western Cultural History was founded in 1984 by Father Edward Malatesta, who served as, for a period of time, as the director on the board of USCCB at that time. And throughout the years, and we have grown into a viable premier research institute for the study of Chinese Western cultural history through the reviewing, discussion, and exchanges on the subject among scholars. Let's see. So the 40 years of our history carries a lot of legacies and memories and accomplishments, and all we are doing is to promote cross-cultural exchanges through academic activities. Now, founded at University of San Francisco, and we moved to Boston College in October 2021. So we're now situated in a beautiful campus of Boston College. And as you can see, the campus, our conference room, our research room. And among the materials that we have, we make them available for researchers, scholars or not, are archival materials, rare books, Chinese and Western. We have an interesting map collection focusing on East Asia. We have Christian artworks and of different kinds. And we have different kinds of archival collections, including Passionist China collection. This particular picture is from that particular collection that Chiang Kai-shek and Bishop Bulgaria. And have some unique Chinese language materials. For example, the Canton Diocese archives from 1840s to 1940s. And among many of the materials in that particular collection are about 600 pages of church property deeds and in the Guangzhou area. And some people and scholars said it's a gold mine, and if the church tries to use those deeds to claim the properties back, great part of the downtown Guangzhou city would be returned to the church. So it's quite interesting. And people have used those materials to study on various subjects. And also we produce publications, and publications including research papers, collection of research papers, original materials. We reproduce them, and from the Qing dynasty to the present, to the 1950s, I should say, and also guidebooks for the different archival collections, and it's both in Chinese and Western languages. In recent years, we launched a special study series in collaboration with Brill in the Netherlands. It's called The Study of the History of Christianity in East Asia. It's a collection, through this particular collection of publications, we promote people's understanding and new knowledge, if we may, about the history of Christianity in what we call the Sinosphere in East Asia. In other words, the countries among them, the connected history and the history of the church and the missionary experience in those countries, so Japan, China, Korea, and beyond. In addition, we also organize different events, including big, such as international academic conferences, small workshops, small-scale workshops to help postdoc research fellows to produce their first manuscript after they obtain their PhD degrees. We also organize fellowship programs, and this is the first cohort of fellows that we welcomed at Boston College, standing at the Seahawk. This is during the summer. And throughout the years, we must have, since the, I would say, the late 1980s, or 1989, 1989, we must have supported more than about 200 scholars, most of them at the doctoral and above levels, both from China and from other countries, on this particular subject. Well, I've talked a lot about the academic events, but what is the relationship between the Reach Institute and the Catholic Church? And that's an interesting area that Father Ed Malatesta, the founding director of the Reach Institute, and later on, as I succeeded the directorship and after him, and then I passed on the directorship to another Jesuit priest that we observe very closely, and we try to handle it in a way that we as a research and educational institution usually does. And for example, this is a picture of Xiaoxin Library. And during the 1980s, and under the leadership of Father Malatesta, and we helped ship significant number of Western language books and to Xiaoxin Seminary and set up their a seminary library. And it is named after him as 爱德图书馆, and his Chinese name is Ma Aider. And so throughout the years, and Father Ed taught not only in different seminaries, but also at Peking University, Fudan University, and beyond. And this is a picture of him in the early 1990s, I believe, at Xiaoxin. And at that time, he still had some dark hair. Now, then, this is an interesting and unique photo as well. All of these people, young people, and except I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us, are what we call the Malatesta scholars. After Father Ed passed on, and we established a special scholarship to support Chinese scholars, especially doctoral level, to support their study in the history of Christianity in China, in any subject. It could be in intellectual history, sociology, art history, science, and goes beyond literature, language, and so on and so forth. So in 2008, and I was able to invite then the provincial of the Jesuit China province, Father Beta Liu, and then a Chinese scholar, Dr. Fan Lizhu from Fudan University, who's a sociology of religion scholar, close colleague of Dick Madsen from Fudan University, to have a spiritual dialogue and in response to the social economic development in China at that time. It was just around Olympic time at that moment. It was a remarkable experience for a lot of them. It was not a religious event, but it's a exchange of spirituality and faith, and on basis of scholarly research. And we feel that this is one way that we connect our research, our scholarship to faith. And those people, now they have served as deans of universities, and vice president of universities, and senior professors of universities. They're really the backbone of many universities in China today. Before the pandemic, and was fortunate enough to be invited by Beijing Diocese to be a keynote speaker at their annual conference Father Zhao organized this annual conference primarily for younger scholars in China, and also some young priests and sisters who are interested in the cross-cultural exchange between China and the West, and to try to create a platform so that scholars can dialogue with the clergy from the church, which is really wonderful. And I learned a lot from some of those young people. But that's a way that we could keep our connection going. Our goals are very simple, and to educate new generations of scholars in the history of Christianity in China and East Asia, number one. Number two, promoting academic exchanges with connected history in multidisciplinary areas. In other words, what we do is not simply religion or theology, but multidisciplinary approach. In other words, there are a lot of connecting points and points of interactions between the East and West through faith, through Catholicism. Could be science, could be history, could be sociology, could be music, could be art. It goes on and on and on. We're trying to broaden that horizon so that people can intensify and bring new knowledge and new information and present the history as a very rich, dynamic, cross-cultural interaction experience. That's what we do. Now, of course, like so many of you today, we have observed and encountered enormous number of changes and difficulties in recent years, and politically and academically, when it comes to academic exchange in our areas of studies. And typical issues include, for example, difficulties today to organize any joint academic events in China. Two, increased censorship for any scholarly activities, including cameras in classrooms monitoring what the teachers are saying. And some students do report back to the school authorities about what the teachers have been talking about in the classroom. And difficulties to administer exchange visits in both countries, and getting a visa, coming to settle down, and American students go to China, as it goes both ways. Difficulties sometimes to the extent of impossibility to consult archival sources and publish academic works in China. And today, and scholars keep saying that, well, sometimes you can still talk about what you are interested in and discuss in a meeting, but to turn it into a published paper or a book, wait for 3 or 4 years, and if you're lucky, you get approval. And so that becomes almost impossible. Scholars who were actively involved in collaborations and promotions of our studies have either passed on, retired, getting old like me, staying quiet under the circumstances, or moving on to other areas of safer research activities. And then, last not the least, and new generations of young scholars are noticeably, at least my anecdotal observation, more pragmatic in their choice of involvement, academically and administratively. And it goes on and on and on. And of course, we are observing the development and responding to the current situation actively and prudently. And we're trying to organize events that will continue our mission, but will result in less conflicts or less trouble, if you may. In spite of the difficulties, I want to point out that the fundamental principle of our mission and related activities in this regard, I want to share with all of you a rare voice recording of Father Edward Malatesta, and some of you here still know him. And as a founding director of the Reach Institute, and he had lots of very interesting reflections on the intercultural relationship. And this particular recording was done in the late 1980s as China was experiencing tremendous social and economic changes. And Father Ed reflected on the relationship between Mattel Ricci and the Chinese people. Listen.
First of all is his friendly attitude toward other people. He had respect for the Chinese as individuals and as a people. He admired their country and their long and beautiful, rich culture. He was an expert at meeting with people. He spent hours and hours in conversation with friends. He was invited to dinners. He returned the invitations. And he engaged in sincere dialogue. So that quality of friendship is, I think, the very basic one that we should have today.
And indeed, as Ricci said in one of his famous treatises on friendship, if we know the value of friends, every time we go out to meet people, we will not return home without seeking to make a new friend. Thank you.
So my wife, Amanda, and I first went to China in the 1990s after 1989年, while Deng Xiaoping was still the leader of the People's Republic in China, and the Catholic Church there was still recovering from the turbulent years of the Cultural Revolution. Do I have hair? Oh, I have a hat. Maybe I do. So we were enrolled in classes at Beijing Central University of Nationalities, 中央民族大学, right next to Renmin Daxue. And among the most memorable experiences we had was studying traditional Chinese calligraphy under the university's classical Chinese literature professor, Xiaoxin. We spent long hours in the evening under a bare light bulb, grinding ink and practicing brush strokes for several styles of calligraphy, kaishu, lishu, duanshu. I still have our practice sheets. That's my calligraphy from the 1990s. I still have our practice sheets with Professor Che's corrections. During the 1990s, the relationship between China and the US, I think, was hopeful. And while we were there in China, we frequently heard the phrase 中美友谊, or China-US friendship. Our new Chinese friends would pour warm cups of tea while we chatted about the cultural differences and similarities between China and the US. And during our calligraphy practice, Professor Che would have us use the phrase 中美人民是一家, or China and the US are one family, as our example for clerical script. Now, much has changed since the 1990s. During my last trip to China, I encountered a very different spirit. Slogans like 中国第一, China is number one. Another one is time and momentum are on our side, have replaced these slogans of global friendship and unity. And of course, and in the US, I can't help but recognize that here too, optimistic hope for friendship with China has largely been replaced by new aphorisms such as America is the best or make America great again. And it's not my point. It's not my point here to comment on these popular recent slogans, but I am interested in discussing how the US-China Catholic Association can serve to restore relationships and build bridges between China and the US in ways that look more familiar to those of us who lived through an era when terms such as friendship and optimism were more common. Now, to focus on the situation of Catholics in China. Mind you, I spent a good deal of time going through old photo albums to find many of these images. So to focus especially in regards to how the US church can be most helpful, we must at once be realistic and optimistic. The situation is both very bad and very hopeful. I've spoken with too many Chinese bishops and priests to view matters with blind optimism. But I've learned from the same bishops and priests that despite the complexities, there is reason for optimism. And so just let me give you one example of the complexities that define China's Catholic community. Father Rob's, his sharing of a black and white and a color image, I think is perfect to the next, it's a good way to think about the next part of my remarks. Since the Catholic Patriotic Association, the 中国天主教爱国会, was established in 1957, Chinese Catholics have practiced their faith in two nebulously delineated groups, the so-called above ground and underground communities. And since China has been largely isolated from much of the universal church since 1949, the evolutionary developments in the larger Catholic world have influenced China, in my opinion, just a bit less than in other places. So in Beijing, for example, one can regularly attend Mass in Chinese, English, and Latin. And the liturgical and devotional culture of China is quite different from what one experiences in Catholic pews elsewhere. In my mind, China's unique expressions of Catholic worship and community are perhaps, in many ways, more authentically local, since in other places the church's hierarchy has been a dominating influence. If you attend a Mass among many old Catholics in China, they intone Buddhist chants through Mass, where they've replaced the words with Marian and Christocentric hymns. So this is precisely why connections between communities are crucial. It is in these encounters that bridges are built, and more importantly, a global community can be built. Within China, connections between the above ground and underground communities are important, as well as connections between China's Catholics and those of other cultures and other countries. So I'll focus just very briefly on the complexities of these two communities, the so-called above ground and underground. So I was in Guizhou in 2008, just the Olympics had finished. I went down to Guizhou, where I spent several days meeting with the local priests and the three bishops who were there in the cathedral at Guiyang. So I first met Bishop Wang Chongyi, recognized then by the Catholic Patriotic Association as the ordinary of the diocese since he was installed there in 1988. I then walked a few feet away to the office of his coadjutor bishop, Xiaoxin, who had been consecrated the previous year in 2007. And I was then able to meet the third bishop, Hu Daguo, who was consecrated an underground bishop in 1987, 1 year before the government-sanctioned consecration of Bishop Wang Chongyi. So let me briefly describe the ecclesial situation of the Archdiocese of Guiyang as I walked back and forth between the rooms of these three bishops. Bishop Hu was recognized by the Holy See as the official ordinary of the Archdiocese of Guiyang. Bishop Wang was his auxiliary bishop, according to Rome, and the Vatican was still trying to figure out then how to categorize Bishop Xiao, though Pope Benedict XVI recognized his consecration and had in fact the episcopal ring of Bishop Xiao that he wore on his finger was a gift from Pope Benedict. The Catholic Patriotic Association viewed Wang as the ordinary, Xiao as the auxiliary, and Hu to be a regular priest in the archdiocese. On paper, Rome and Beijing had very different records of the hierarchy of the archdiocese. But all three bishops informed me that while they functioned as if the government records were the rule, they all accepted the Vatican's view to be the reality of the archdiocese. And to complicate this a bit more, the two, quote, above ground bishops, Wang and Xiao, and the underground bishop, Hu, this is important, all lived together in the same building beside the cathedral. This is not uncommon. This is far more common than one thinks. Of course, the government knew all of this, but chose not to intervene as long as the state's understanding of who was the official ordinary remained on all the archdiocesan signs and records. Even more confusion. Bishop Xiaozijiang was officially recognized by the Pope as the ordinary of the Archdiocese of Guiyang in 2014. So this was the situation of only one diocese out of 147 ecclesial jurisdictions in China. From the top, China's Catholic Church is a complicated network of complicated organization and very complicated strategies to survive and flourish. From the bottom, in the pews, China's church is much less complicated. The faithful seek to live their lives as faithful Catholics. This brings this sort of brief cross-section of China's Catholic situation is precisely why, in my opinion, we need more encounters and more bridges between China and the US. Sort of moving toward my conclusion. So let me just dilate for a moment here on what I see to be one of the most important works of the US-China Catholic Association, the tours in China. I know it's a complicated moment right now. In 2019, I led a group to several important Catholic sites in northern China. I orchestrated the tour to be mostly historical, but there was a rich spiritual dimension woven into our itinerary. While there, on the USCCA program, we visited many famous locations important for understanding the non-Christian history of China, the so-called Sanjiao, that Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism was very much part of our itinerary. We visited the Forbidden City, the Great Wall, local temples. We began and ended our travels in Beijing, at the Jesuit-run Beijing Center, where we received private access to rare Catholic books, maps, and art from the era of the early Jesuit mission to the 20th century. But at the center of the tour was our time in Catholic churches, in the pews and in the parish halls, where we sat beside China's Christians during worship and formal prayer. We visited several pilgrimage locations dedicated to Mary and to the Catholic martyrs. I introduced the group to the Tianjin Cathedral, where Father Vincent Lei Mingyuan, distinguished himself as an ally of the church there. We went to the small Catholic village, Zhujiahe, where around 3,000 Chinese Catholics died in a single day during the Boxer Uprising in 1900. While there, we attended Mass, and after Mass, I introduced everyone to Mrs. Zhu, the granddaughter of Saint Mary Zhu, who died while trying to save her priest during the attack on the village. We visited also the small village of Wuyi, where other martyrs had died, and the Cathedral of Taiyuan, near the location of a massacre of both Protestants and Catholics in June of 1900. But what were probably the most rewarding parts of our tour were the encounters with Chinese bishops, priests, sisters, and lay faithful. We met the clergy and sisters at Beijing's famous Gothic cathedral. We met the rector of the elegant Tianjin Cathedral. We joined the faithful for masses at Dongargo village, Zhujiahe village, several other villages. We met bishops and priests of the Diocese of Changzhou, better known, I think, among scholars as Xianxian. And we connected with locals at the tomb of Matteo Ricci and the old Jesuit observatory. We also visited a Catholic institution in Hebei, where the faithful there care for the dying and severely handicapped. We met an elderly Catholic man there who was deaf, blind, and mute. And when you touched his arm, he directed his face toward you to welcome you with a heartwarming smile, the only gift he had left to give. So let me just end with another area of the US-China Catholic Association where I personally most often dwell, the area of academic study. Along with places such as the Ricci Institute, the USCCA encourages and supports scholars, non-Christian and Christian, who spend long hours in archives and in the field conducting the essential research that is required for us to understand the past and present of China's complicated and I think astonishing Catholic community. Scholars of China's Christian history, at their best, build two types of bridges. First, they collaborate in their research, building bridges of friendship and partnership between scholars in China and the West. And second, They provide more accurate information in order to create bridges of clear understanding between China and the West. Now, with a great deal of help from scholarly colleagues such as Dr. Xiaoxin, Father Rob Carbonneau, the support of organizations such as the USCCA and the Ricci Institute, I've been able to contribute academic studies that I hope shall add to what we know about Sino-Western exchange. So, to conclude, what have I said? I've mentioned the changing global landscape over the past several decades. A time that has witnessed the growth of national disproportionate self-interest and the loss of the memory of former eras of mutual interest and friendship. I noted the complicated matrix of the Chinese Catholic Church that rejects easy answers and hasty categories. And I just described how the USCCA serves as an important venue for restoring cultural friendship and understanding by providing venues for encounter and scholarly collaboration. The narrative of suffering is a true narrative, right? And I think this is an important one. If we were to overlay with that narrative with the hue of complete optimism, I think that we would be, in a sense, colonizing the native Chinese narrative, right? We need to acknowledge both parts. But for many, Matteo Ricci is among the best examples of bridge builders who connected China and the West. His legacy within human history is enormous. But even more than being described as a map maker, philosopher, theologian, scientist, and missionary, he is appreciated as a friend. I'll just end with this, because after all, friendship is one of the greatest rewards of cultural encounter and academic scholarship. The two bridges that define the work, in my mind, of the U.S.-China Catholic Association. So I'll just end there because I know my time is up, and I think we'll all have questions. Thank you.
This panel goes till 4:15. I believe Mary Sluka is here. We have to be at the cathedral at the church at 5, right?
Yeah.
So we should be moving around 4:45 certainly towards the church next door. So everyone just be prepared. That's what's next. So arrange your time accordingly. I have a. Oh yeah. I'm just going to open this up for questions to the group, but I'm going to ask my colleagues one question. Xiaoxin was there in the Ricci Institute the other day, and I was surprised I said this. He was surprised I said this. I said to him, you know, I really feel disillusioned. And he looked at me, and again, we've known each other for years. I don't think I ever said something like that to him. And he just looked at me. And it was a compendium of a lot of things going on. It had to do with China, it had to do with just the intensity of constantly thinking about China, and also trying, I think, and this is the question to Xiaoxin and also Tony Clark, as he listened, and this was what a good friend does, he listened to me, and I said, I think I'm disillusioned because the energy of knowledge and creativity to keep hopeful is exhausting me. And I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to move forward with it. I'm exhausted. I'm disillusioned because I'm afraid I'm going to lose hope. So, most people ask, you know, what's your challenge? What are you disillusioned for? So my question to my colleagues, very quick answer them all questions, is how do you, when you're disillusioned and the creativity of hope has to move forward and the longevity of all this, how do you do it? What's one example that you might give personally, just in that regard? And the reason I'm asking this is because I think this is a life issue that all of us face.
That's a loaded question. This time of the day, I think that I need 3 cups of coffee to think about a response. I think there's a difference between dissolution or illusion and vision. And the difference is not simply because of the 2 different words and the pronunciation and all of that, but also how you look at yourself and look at somebody else and look at your relationship. I think that we all at different times have this dissolution. And coming back to my relationship, for example, with Father Edward Malapesta, was my mentor, and throughout my encounters with him, our friendship, I saw him cry 2 times. And once, and his sister passed away, unfortunately. But another time was when June the 4th took place. And all of a sudden, and boom, something like that. Nobody mentally expected that, even remotely expected that would happen. And I know that he gave a very passionate presentation in front of the City Hall of San Francisco, and he came back and cried. And I think, it's a combination of frustration, disillusion probably, but also and his way to react to something unprecedented that has happened. But we're historians, and history repeats itself. Now, I feel that whatever that we're experimenting, one thing I'm convinced that if 1 + 1 is 2, it is always 1 + 1 is 2. If something has happened in history that proved to be wrong, it cannot be right in the future. And that's how people ask me about, what about the policies and all of that? And fortunately, or unfortunately, I lived through the Cultural Revolution. 1966, I was an early teenager. And the first death that came into my mind was the principal of my elementary school committed suicide. And it's the first time that I encountered death. And but that kind of experience, that kind of control, and that kind of human sacrifice and human suffering, and that if you repeat it, and I think the result is very clear to me. So with that in mind, I think what I'm going to do, I think the situation challenges us with certainly compassion and also creativity. What else can we do? And what can be done? And in Chinese we say, 魔高一尺，道高一丈. You have this barrier, and we'll create something that overcome. And so in that case, and I'm convinced, and human creativity and intellectual intelligence would surpass any temporary political, social setbacks. And I'm sure of it. I may not be able to see that moment, but that will happen.
So everyone but me has talked about 1989. When I was in Beijing once, I met with a professor regularly. He was rather much older than I am. And I had to ask the question, were you there? He was in Beijing. And he said, my best friend was standing beside me, and we heard some loud noises, and suddenly his lips were swollen because a bullet had hit his mouth and passed by and caused his lips to swell. And he said he was grateful for the rest of his life that his best friend survived. The bullet was just a little out and too far so he could live. And I remember him saying, we can be positive in times and see good results. There's lots of wisdom that he would sort of convey to me. And when I went home, after chatting with him, there were people running in China at Zhongyang Minju Daxue at the Central Nationalities, students were running around the track, and they were running, and I started to see them flag. And I didn't know this turn of phrase, but they said, 加油, 加油, which means add oil. Add oil to this flagging flame. And I remember thinking, 加油是什么意思? Like, what does that mean, 加油? And it's sort of, this great encouragement. And when I saw them yelling, 加油, 加油, wow, man, they just bolted, right? The running picked up pace. And I remember thinking, connecting the story of 1989 and watching them add oil as they ran around the track and thinking, I want to learn from both of those things. Also, and this is the third part, I like the number 3. The third part is I read an essay a long time ago and recently by C.S. Lewis called Learning in Wartime, where he's writing about why do we scholars keep studying and doing things he wrote during the Second World War, when the world is kind of falling apart around us. And he said, well, we could just stop, or we could realize that all of these things that are happening have always been there. They just happen at different levels, right? There's nothing new. It's just maybe more now, and it'll go away and come back. But we have to keep going. So those are the 3 things I keep in mind when I flag. But also, I should have said 4, my friends are so incredibly motivational to me. Every Saturday I get a little message from my friend Xiaoxin, and my wife and I look at this message, little film of his daughter Claire, and we giggle and laugh and we have such a good time. And sometimes, in the late afternoon when it's in the evening here, Father Rob will call and he's somewhere having a libation listening to music. And I might have had a horrible day with students telling me, why did you give me a C? And Father Rob calls and he's like having a beer. And I just feel very inspired by my friendships. So I don't know, those are my 3-4 things.
Questions? We have 15 minutes. Observations. Did I say what? 4:15, right? 4:15, yeah.
I just want to make a comment. During one of my trips to China, I found 2 calligraphies written by Emperor Guangxi. Do you know that? He wrote about the Passion of Christ. He described how he was each step by step, like the rooster call, also the whipping and all this. And that's why I think he was actually very touched by Matteo Ricci. He converted it, but I guess officially as an emperor, he couldn't declare his affiliation. So I just want you to know. Many of them know that, but I don't know if others know about this too. But that was so I have these 2 framed above my bed because of the remembering.
Other comments or observations for any of us?
If I could, I have one comment, and I'll speak louder. One of the things I have, while I listen to the really inspiring presentations throughout the conference so far, and comments and questions and so on and so forth, and I feel, and I think I can speak anything that I would like to, and I feel there's a limitation if we just simply focus on our thoughts and activities on the church itself. And today I had a delightful lunch conversation with Bishop Pei, and while we were having this conversation, I was thinking, look, and I shared that with one of the participants. I said, look, and the province of your province and Liaoning province has a population of 40 million people, and Catholics is 100,000, sisters 600, priests 68. Now, putting all of those numbers together, can you simply focus on your work, on the benedictions and the conversion and the confession and all of these church activities, hoping that the church in China will have a very bright future? I don't think so. You need to expand your horizon and look at people beyond the church itself, who may or may not come to the church, but still trying to look for spiritual nourishment on a daily basis. And how? And how do you address that? Now, on so many occasions, and I attend conferences, scholarly conferences in China, and either as an organizer, or as a speaker, or as a participant, and oftentimes, and people would come up to me and chat with me about all kinds of issues. Could be personal life, marriage, death, and tense relationship with the professors, or with somebody else, or some social issues. And then, oftentimes, by the end of the conversation, they were a little disappointed when I told them, look, I'm not a priest. And although they shared with me, I'm a Christian. And they often say I'm a Christian, and they thought I must be a priest or something. So, and at that moment, I was really hoping, wouldn't it be wonderful if I were a priest sitting next to me, and not giving up, preach to him or to her, or hearing confession, but offer some insight so that we can sit together and sharing with each other about life experience. Christian or not, that will be really enriching. Now, Bishop Pei said, oh, we have intentionally been sending young clergy, sisters, and priests overseas to study. And then to study what? Theology and philosophy, which is all good. But I think the intention is they come back to the church and then address people within this church compound. But have you ever thought about who are you going to talk to if this person is in AI? Are you equipped with anything to establish any spiritual dialogue with that person who is specialized in a field that you have no knowledge with? And that is quite interesting. I have a student from Boston College. Just one day, I told our administrator and said, I need a student to help me, work on a new collection of archives, the Presbyterian missionary went to Sichuan. And she said, okay, here are 8 of them. Choose anything you want, anybody you want. So I kind of close my eyes, point my finger at one person, Leah. Okay, and when I saw her, and I mean, that name is just, it's not really a Chinese name, but she's Chinese. And I said, how come you have this name? And she told me up front, I was abandoned at the age of 1. I was adopted by a Catholic family in this country. And I said, what do you want to do? What is your major? Art history. I said, what? Are you going to get a job? What do you want to do? Museum. And I said, okay, you're going to lose, you're going to lose it even before you get into the job market. But she said, well, I'm a double major. And what is the next one? Computer science. I want to combine AI with art history so that the next generation of museum staff can enjoy this. I can present the world from a different perspective. Have any of our priests, sitting here or not, ever thought about what if our church, either clergy or regular, parishioner, are equipped with that kind of knowledge? How much of a bigger audience that we're going to have, this, this church, Catholic Church will have, and how many issues they will address. So, and today I was so delighted, and Bishop Pate said, oh, this is Father, whatever the first name is, and he used to be working with me. He's in language, and he's studying language in his PhD. I said, wonderful, you do something beyond philosophy and theology, which are also good. I'm not trying to, otherwise I'll be really
2 minutes, Xiaoxin.
Okay. See how long I've been in a Jesuit institution and just talking like a priest. But I said, okay, and then you can really have a dialogue with people beyond. I mean, that's all important. I mean, your tanko is important, and your church is important, your parish is important, but think of beyond that. And I think that that if we can be, I mean, human creativity is boundless, I mean, without limit. And I have been thinking, really, with our archival collection, how we can promote, under the current circumstances, intellectual exchanges that will not give us trouble. But still, for example, training in methodology. I mean, anybody, any research, you need methodology, but we use missionary archival materials about missionaries who went to Yan'an and talked with the leadership of Communist Party in 1944. That's interesting. But then, I mean, the impact is invisible. And creativity, human creativity is, indefinite. So if we could work together on that, I think it would be enjoyable. Sorry.
What, very, very clear enunciation of your reflection. Thank you very much. Comments, observations? We have yes, Karina.
I think just to follow up,
We're recording, so.
Thank you. I think just to follow up to what you just said, I think I have a marketing background, so I don't have an academic background or a theological background, but in marketing, it's always meet them where they are and where the people are. And now it's here. And going back to that, and I mean, it's sort of a phase with theology, meet people where they are, come to them or come to build it, they will come. We've now built it, this method of communication. And perhaps one of the very few linings of COVID was we all learned how to use this tool in a way that we never thought we would have to. And using it, I think it's probably shot up since COVID because it's become that line of communication. And I think it's a careful path and journey because we don't want to lose this getting together. But there's also such an opportunity to spread the message and to understand how to use the technology, as many of us are doing, to use it more and more in social media, in communication, but also I think for very much of a younger generation, and I have 2 teenagers, that is the future. They know more than any of us will ever know. I mean, anytime I have a problem, I go to them, and I think everybody here does too. I think there's got to be a way to use AI within confines and understand how to not lose the personal touch, but use it as a tool in spreading a message of hope and changing the narrative. The narrative has been set for social media for the younger generation to want to be, I want this. It's very want basis. I think that it could change, we could change the narrative to what do I want to become in the longer term? And this could be a dialogue for that.
Bert. Well, I got a big voice, so I think I'm going to be okay. No,
We're recording.
So my question is the following. You as experts in this field, are you aware of in the last decade or
Walk into the mic, please.
Are you aware of in the last decade or several decades of such a delegation as we have here of prelates from China? Is this the first time that this has happened? Has it happened in this way in the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, etc.?
1981, Montreal, Dick Madsen and I were at it was called China's Call to a New Beginning. It was the first time that the Protestant and Catholic Futishan, Bishop Ting, I think was there, right, Dick? We were there. It was an ecumenical gathering where it was the first time bishops were, religious leaders were allowed really and permitted to come. They went to Canada because Canada had much stronger diplomatic friendship models than the United States did. And so Dick, myself, Sister Ann Gormley, Peter Barry, trying to think, John Paul Wiest, we were Americans, and they wanted people who were open to start to force a dialogue. So the answer is, this has been going on for a long time. The roller coaster mirrors the political world, and sometimes I think that we have to ask ourselves at times, how do we go and engage in China? And do we change when we go to China? And how polite are we? Or are we obtuse in that regard? I think what's often, how many times are people from China come here? Good question, always needed. But the study tours, we're not always critical about how pleasant or obnoxious or gentle or open we might be, and within their parameters, and I think that's something we have to really work at. That's the answer. They've been going on for a number of years, I think, in a lot of different phases, especially with church delegations. And Europe has a whole system going on as well, right, Tony? One more question, two more questions. Kathy.
Thanks to all three of you. I want to just go back to what Dr. Xiaoxin Wu has said. And I think it was really inspiring. It helped me tie a lot of things together so far, what I've heard, experienced in this conference. We've talked a lot about love and friendship and dialogue. And I think another way of putting those words is to say, enlarge our hearts. I think Pope Francis has said, invited Christians to enlarge our tent. This is the job that is given for all of us by God. We are so blessed to see so many different people. And what's exciting about everyone's story is that we see how each one of you, your heart has been enlarged by the very weird life choices you have made, right? Anthony, you went to China for no reason. This gentleman over here, Father Rick, for some reason, liked Chinese trains. We had a professor, a Chinese person, getting a doctorate in French. I just find all those things so fascinating, and this is the essence of life. We do something unexpected, we don't know what's going to happen. As a result, we become more mature, our heart is bigger. We have found a larger space for different people, and this is the attitude that we can have in having dialogue with non-Christians. And I think the life of the church will be much more vibrant as a result. So I studied Buddhism. One of the phrases that Buddhists often use is that the human heart is actually ultimate reality. Our reality is only limited by the size of our heart. And in their vision, the heart is as big as emptiness. It is as big as 净虚空变法界, which means there is no limitation, neither in time or in space, right? So no matter what difficulty we run into, the disillusion that we all experience in so many days of our lives, if there's no limitation in time or space, we can truly go forward in hope and courage. As St. Paul says, to live is Christ, to die is gain. It's just like crossing a border, going through a door, and we find more space. Our heart continues to enlarge.
I think what we will do, Hugh O'Donnell, and then we move on to the liturgy, please.
Thanks very much. Very helpful, and especially the history of the USCCA. But what I heard is this: that we've chosen resurrection without facing death. We've chosen, and that's where the discouragement comes. We're using the wrong tools. This organization, USCCA, is a non-membership organization. No one can explain it to me. It's all bosses, all directors, and that's it. That's right. That's exactly right. And so we don't face that. We haven't faced that yet. we're trying to face that, but it's not, and what we can't face, and this is just what I think, but I feel certain about it, is this: we have not been able to face the elements of the missionary elements that have died. The missionary era died in he said, you're talking 1989, right? I think it's 1949. That was the end of the missionary era in China. And we haven't accepted that yet. And so we're unconsciously or in the background, we're still working with this hope for resurrection without facing the death elements in that. I'm sorry to be the last person to speak at this point, but really, we're really struck. It comes down to this. This is an organization that says explicitly we are not a membership organization. It's impossible to say this. Thank you.
But we can become an affiliate organization full of members, right?
Hugh O'Donnell is precisely right. Mary's precisely right. We can continue on how right and correct and creative and move forward. We need your assistance in this area. So we now close this session, move on to the liturgy, and we pray for the insight with thanks, and we thank all of you, and we thank our panelists. Thank you very much.